Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatting Cinema. I'm Flynn.
I'm Gianni.
So today we're going to start this episode. Over the past 2 weeks, we've each seen a new movie that just hit theaters, a different new movie that the other person has not yet seen. So we thought it would be fun to go into these movies that we saw, tell the other person about them, tell you guys about them, what we liked, and things like that. So I saw mine yesterday. I saw A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and I really dug it. It's very different. I have a feeling that this could have sort of turned into a paint by numbers biopic, and that happens every Oscar season. And usually, the strength of the performances carries them, and that's certainly true about strength of performance in this movie because Tom Hanks is excellent as Mr. Rogers. He's so good. He really disappears into the role, which isn't necessarily an easy thing to do when you're Tom Hanks. Not that he doesn't have the talent to do it, but because of where he is at this stage in his career,
Yeah.
it's kind of difficult to disappear into a role like this. But he does a flawless job. I think that given the amount of screen time he has and the way the story goes, for Oscar contention, he's probably going to slide into the Best Supporting Actor category. That might surprise a lot of people who haven't seen the movie because it's the Mr. Rogers movie.
Yeah.
But the main plot of this movie follows a writer for Esquire called Lloyd Vogel doing a profile on Mr. Rogers. And so I would say he's the protagonist of the movie. He's the main character, and through him we get our experiences with Fred Rogers. I also think, as far as Oscar contention is concerned, this movie should be a dark horse for Best Production Design.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that's going to surprise a lot of people until they see it. But the movie's told with this really interesting framing device of being posed sort of as an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It opens up, and the episode is about Lloyd and emotional issues he's dealing with, a strained relationship with his father, who left when he was very young, when his mother was sick. Lloyd is a new father himself, so he's dealing with this. So all of these things kind of culminate into this, spiral for Lloyd, and he's struggling, and the profile of Mr. Rogers that he's doing isn't the typical type of work he does for Esquire. He's typically doing investigative journalism. So he feels kind of disrespected when he gets this assignment because he looks at it almost as getting assigned to do a puff piece on this guy, and he's pretty cynical, and he doesn't necessarily believe in the best humanity has to offer. But as far as production design is concerned, because it's framed as this episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood about Lloyd, all the exterior shots, so any transitions of cars driving, planes flying, are all done like miniature sets on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And that wasn't something I necessarily knew going into the movie. So it was so interesting to watch, and it's so unique to have that. And just listening to how it sounds like out loud, it sounds like it really shouldn't work. But it does. It really does. It's and that serves to sort of separate it from the crowd as far as biopics are concerned, which is really what you have to do now because there are so many biopics coming out. There are filmmakers that have kind of found out that that's a sort of shortcut to the Oscars. It's always Oscar bait. It's a good way to get your foot in the door. If you're an actor, a biopic performance is a good way to get nominated. So I think that filmmakers now are kind of saying, like, well, how can I tell this story about somebody and make it new? And Marielle Heller directed this. She directed Can You Ever Forgive Me, starring Melissa McCarthy. And she's kind of established herself as a very unique type of filmmaker as far as these biopics are concerned, because that's another one that's great about Lee Israel. But Lee Israel is a very different character from Fred Rogers. So it was interesting to transition from that to this. But it's got a lot of heart, which is what you would expect from a movie about Fred Rogers. It's really beautiful. It's really heartfelt. It'll make you feel a little bit better about humanity. Just looking at somebody like Fred Rogers, who kind of never gave up and always believed in the best of people. Really great story, really great performances, and I really dug it.
Yeah, sweet. So the movie I saw that you haven't seen is similar in a lot of ways, I think. It's
Okay.
Ford versus Ferrari, starring Christian Bale, Matt Damon, and a slew of really amazing supporting cast members. Catriona Balfe is in the movie. John Bernthal's great. Tracy Letts, I think, has been a rising star in the past few years, in Lady Bird and in a lot of really great supporting roles. And he plays another one here as Henry Ford II. He is the head of Ford Motors, and this film's based on a true story. And it's also, in a sense, a biopic about Ken Miles, a race car driver, and Carroll Shelby, who designed Ford's GT, which they used in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And actually, it won them the race. But spoiler alert for the movie. So yeah, Ford won that race. But yeah, similar in a lot of ways. It has really great performances, and it's directed by James Mangold, who I think is probably one of the safest bets as far as directors go in Hollywood today. If you have James Mangold working on your movie, you're probably going to get a really solid product. And that's what it is. It feels like what they try to promote with their Ford vehicles. It feels like a very good film, like solid bet. When you go in, you know you're going to get something really entertaining and really fun. But that's just on the surface because it goes so much deeper. I think that you see a lot of character growth and building with Ken Miles. You really get behind him, and that's important when he's your protagonist and he's the driver. So you want to feel kind of like you're rooting for him in these races, and you want him to win. You need him to win. And they do a really good job building out his character with his family. He has a great relationship with his son. And Ken Miles, by the way, is played by Christian Bale, who, similar to Tom Hanks, disappears into his roles, which can be difficult now, I think, for Bale, who's at a peak in his career. But he's known. He's known for disappearing into his roles as a method actor. But Matt Damon also, I think it's tricky. It's going to be tricky when Oscar season really comes around and we start to vote, because I think it could be argued either way that these two guys are the protagonists.
Sure.
The film opens on Matt Damon's character, Carroll Shelby, racing in 24 Hours of Le Mans. And it kind of shows just how dangerous this sport can be. And I think that at the time, people had no idea what they were doing as far as just sending these guys out on the road. And sure, they're in fireproof suits and things like that, but just the safety of it was just not a priority. But that really shows. But anyway, the movie's super entertaining, really well made. It's made a ton of money at the box office already. Go out and see it. I think it will be a contender for Best Picture, and I loved it. It's my favorite movie of the year, and I think that's a good lead-in to our next topic, which is our tentative top 5 movies of the year right now. We still have a ton to see. But what so far? What are you looking at?
So far, I'm putting The Lighthouse at number 1. When I do my top 10 at the end of the year, I'll probably say in no particular order.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna put The Lighthouse as my number 1. I really loved it. I haven't stopped thinking about it since I saw it. This has been such a strong Oscar season, and we say tentative top 5 because when we revisit this at the end of the year, we have so many more movies that we want to see that we feel like could sneak into this upper echelon, and we're going to sort of touch on some of the movies that we want to see after we're done going forward with our lists. But The Lighthouse, to me, it's just this descent into madness, and Robert Pattinson, I don't think will win Best Actor. I think he will be nominated. But so far with the movies I've seen this year, he would be my pick for Best Actor. He delivers a bravura performance. He is absurdly good in that movie. And Willem Dafoe is also absurdly good in that movie. And they have to be because it's just them. It's just them and this journey into madness alone on a lighthouse. So they really have to deliver some strong performances building off of each other, and I think they play off each other so well. They have a really good chemistry. But Robert Pattinson has talked about the filming process of this movie being so interesting because they shot on location, so they had to kind of work with the weather. And normally that would be pretty frustrating on a set, and of course it was, but the way Pattinson describes it is it really helped him and Dafoe get into the headspace of these characters, sort of dealing with the ebbs and the flows of the weather, trying to figure out like when to do things, time sort of like melting and not existing anymore as the days go on and they have to do their work. So I think it was kind of the perfect environment to extract these kind of really excellent, like top of the decade performances from them. So that will be my number one as of right now. But all these films that we're going to talk about are so good that it's by an inch, not a mile.
Yeah, definitely. I'll gush a little bit more because my number one is Ford v Ferrari. I just think it's a film that's through and through about passion, and that you don't have to like cars and you don't have to know a thing about cars. And the movie doesn't try to preach that to you and doesn't try to teach you about cars, because it's not what it's about. What it's about is love, and love of the sport, love of the people around you. And I think anyone can get behind that. And we all love an underdog story,
Right.
which is also through and through what it is. And you might not expect a corporation like Ford to be the underdog of any story,
Yeah.
but they are in this film, and you really get behind them. Christian Bale's character, he portrays Ken Miles so well, and to me, that's what's been on my mind since I've seen it. It's just that story of that man who you don't hear a lot about, and who I had never heard about until I saw the film. And he really should be like the face of race car driving, in my opinion. What he did to help Ford get that car made, and with Carroll Shelby as well, Matt Damon's character, is just really unremarkable. So
It's so interesting talking about Ford v Ferrari and kind of how you touched on it's been doing well in the box office, and I wonder if the framing of it being sort of a car story sort of got people in the seats, and not necessarily that they were going and expecting a Fast and the Furious movie or anything, but just having that interest and knowing that they've seen car movies and sport movies and liked them, to get more exposure to a movie that a lot of people put a lot of really hard work into, and that probably will be a pretty heavy contender come Oscar season. So my number two, and again, almost tied for number one because this movie completely blew me away. I talked about it on a previous episode. It's Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho. South Korean film. It's the sort of Oscar movie that's a slice of life. It's all about class struggles and about a poor family that sort of infiltrates a wealthy family's space, and the dominoes kind of fall, and each member of the poor family starts to get a job in the wealthy family's house. And we sort of see this, and the first half is kind of like comedic. It feels like a heist movie at times because it has those similar beats of trying to infiltrate this home. And then the second movie is full thriller, full suspense, horror at times. It really makes you grip the edge of your seat. And it's just really a masterclass in filmmaking. And I think that a lot of people are sort of ranking Parasite as one of the best movies of the decade, full stop. And I completely understand why, because this is just the type of movie that blows you away. And it's the type of movie where, surprisingly enough, I saw all the hype in the world for it, everybody talking about what a masterpiece it was, how flawless it was, and none of that did anything to take anything away from the movie or make me go in and say, oh, well, my expectations were so high they were kind of met, or my expectations were exceeded even though they were so high. I'll be curious to see come Oscar season whether Parasite is one of the top contenders for Best Picture. Because we really had this conversation last year as film goers and film lovers where Roma sort of seemed like it should have been probably Best Picture, at least in contention for it. And it never felt like it was truly competing for Best Picture. It never felt like it had the shot to get there. And just because it's a foreign language film doesn't... I assume that it's going to win Best Foreign Language Film pretty easily, Parasite, at the Oscars. But I do think it should be in contention for Best Picture. And even, as I say, The Lighthouse is my number one so far. If I was voting on Best Picture, I probably would vote for Parasite. just because I think that it's the most valuable movie made this year. And it really shows a filmmaker that's kind of perfected his craft. So I'm excited to see what comes next from Bong Joon-ho. If you've read his comments about superhero movies, probably not because he doesn't like them, but because he doesn't like people in tight-fitting clothes. He said he can never direct a superhero movie. But I would love to see filmmakers like that take on some of these projects, a Star Wars, a Marvel, things like that, because Bong Joon-ho killed it with Parasite.
Yeah.
So that's my number 2 right now.
Yeah, I mean, never say never, right?
Yeah.
You might, yeah. Contrary to your number 2, I think mine really flew under people's radar, and that is Rocket Man,
Okay.
the biopic about Elton John, which is not at all a biopic in my opinion. I think they take a lot of liberties there while still staying true to his story, and even Elton John has come out and said, like, no, this is it. They got it. And I think the reason that this film kind of flew under people's radar is because Bohemian Rhapsody came out a year ago, and 20th Century Fox produced that film as well, and the marketing is almost identical. They look like so similar together.
Even like colors of the posters. Like I feel like there's like a lot of purples used in the promotion of both. Yeah.
Well, and the trailers too just make it look like the same color palette.
Yeah.
I mean, everything looks almost like frame by frame. Whoever cut the trailers, it's almost like Bohemian Rhapsody was the cookie cutter for that.
Yeah.
But they are so different in the way that Bohemian Rhapsody is sort of a by the numbers, scene by scene Freddie Mercury's life, and not even really that.
Yeah.
With music sprinkled in between. Dexter Fletcher directed Rocket Man, and they take such a different route to it. It's like seriously a musical, and there's less talking in the film, I think, than the entire runtime of Bohemian Rhapsody. But, no, it's super great. Taron Egerton, I think, should be up for an Oscar. I don't think he will be, just because I think this film really did kind of fall off, and no one really saw it. But it is the superior film to Bohemian Rhapsody, and if we're going to compare the two, this is the one that should have been made for Freddie Mercury.
Right.
This is the film he deserved. Because this was also made with love for the character. And sure, that can be said for Bohemian Rhapsody, but it clearly wasn't there. And there were a whole slew of other issues with that film. Bryan Singer, talking about you. But yeah, Rocket Man was so good. And Taron Egerton is really singing too, and you can tell that he's so dedicated to the role. And I think to overlook him in the Oscar season would be a really big mistake.
Yeah, there's so much interesting stuff to unpack there about Rocket Man. I mean, number one, just what you closed off on with Taron Egerton. I mean, he is singing every song, and it's amazing. And for him to not be nominated, don't get me wrong, as we're talking about these films that we love, and as we're going to talk about the films that are coming out, this Oscar season is stacked.
Yeah.
There is so much talent on display. But it would be a real disappointment to see him not recognized. As you said, it flew under the radar. It came out over the summer and not November, December, which is the typical Oscar window. And for Rami Malek to win last year as Freddie Mercury, and for Taron Egerton to not be nominated, it's such a weird flip-flop because, one, the Rami Malek Freddie Mercury performance at times feels not like a performance. It feels like an impersonation.
Yeah.
And it's a hard line to toe between performance and impersonation when you're an actor playing a real person. But for Taron, I mean, singing the songs, that's where the emotion really comes from. And it's interesting. They did have identical marketing campaigns, but for Rocket Man to fly under everybody's radar is so interesting because Bohemian Rhapsody did numbers at the box office. It was way on everybody's radar in a way that I don't think anybody was expecting. So I assume that was the sort of mindset behind the studio. Well, we had this hit. This is how we promoted it. This is they probably thought it was a similar movie in their eyes, even though you sort of touched on how really different they are.
Yeah.
So they were like, well, if it worked the first time, we'll try it again, and it didn't, and that's a shame because a lot of people missed out on something that's really good. Yeah. And then the last thing about Rocket Man I wanted to touch on was you said about the liberties they took, and I believe the tagline of that movie was based on a true fantasy, and that is just the perfect way to put that movie.
Yeah.
It's like a fever dream at times. It's really good.
Yeah, and something else I'll say for that comparison between the two films is that with Rocket Man, I think you really get the sense that they, I mean, not like with Bohemian Rhapsody. With Rocket Man, you get to see that Elton John, they really lean into sort of the struggles that he went through as an artist, as an addict, right? And with Bohemian Rhapsody, they really gloss over that. They really gloss over
sanitize it for sure.
They do, yeah. And they get an R rating with Rocket Man.
Yeah.
Not that that's everything, because you can make it work with a PG-13 film. But I would just say that the writers on Bohemian Rhapsody didn't pay their respects to Freddie Mercury in that sense.
Yeah.
So they didn't lean into his real life,
Yeah. And
Rocket Man does that so well and so interestingly. It just feels more like a film than Bohemian Rhapsody ever could to me,
So our number 3 pick is actually the same, which is really interesting. We both put Jojo Rabbit as our number 3 right now. Talked about it in a previous episode. So if you want to hear us go a little bit more in depth about Jojo Rabbit, you can watch that episode. But again, like I was saying with A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood earlier, so much heart on display in Jojo Rabbit, and I think that's what really makes this film come to life. Is I think that Taika Waititi had a story that he wanted to tell, and he told it in a very unique way that could have blown up in his face, and instead it worked perfectly because he's a mad genius.
Yeah.
So Jojo Rabbit is excellent performances. A lot of like tone shifts that work. It's a lot of fun at times. It's very sad at times.
Yeah.
It can be thrilling, but great movie.
Yeah, I agree totally. It really wears its heart on its sleeve. And I would also say that that's a great example of how you can use the PG-13 rating and do some really dark things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go see Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, for sure. And again, if you want to hear us talk a little bit more in depth about Jojo Rabbit, we do have an episode where we delved into it. That's why we're not going to spend too much time talking about it today. So my number 4 is Us. It speaks to how long this year has felt. This movie came out this year, earlier in the year. I believe February. Us came out.
Yeah.
It is so good. Jordan Peele, I think, just continues to blow everybody away. I don't think that anybody doubted him this time, following up on Get Out, which was such a sleeper hit and sort of surprised so many people. But I like Us more than Get Out. I think that that's sort of a more controversial opinion. I don't think that that's the mainstream opinion on that. But Us is more traditional horror, which I really enjoy. I think that, speaking about performances that came before the year that might get overlooked by the Oscars, Lupita should be nominated for her work in Us. 100% full stop. I felt that way coming out of the movie in February, and then when I came out of it the second and third time, I still felt that way, and I feel that way now. She delivers one of the most terrifying performances I've ever seen, but on the flip side, one of the most heartfelt and vulnerable performances in this movie. And she's doing work as 2 different characters, and she just brings both of them to life in such a phenomenal way. And the film is terrifying at times. It has one of the scariest scenes I've ever seen in a theater. It's gripping. It's got social commentary. Again, sort of, it pairs nicely with Parasite, about talking about films that delve into class consciousness and aspects of that in real life. And Jordan Peele is just killing the game.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see him make movies for decades.
Yeah.
Because in 2 films, he's just established himself as one of the most exciting filmmakers working today. And Us, I don't think it flew under anybody's radar. I think plenty of people saw Us, but I think that if you saw it in February and have kind of forgotten about it as all these Oscar movies come out, reinsert it into your lineup and sort of revisit that, and look at performances and direction, because it really blew me away then, and it's been on my mind since then.
Yeah, and similar to Jojo Rabbit, a lot of tonal shifts in Us, right? It flies between comedy 1 minute and then
Yeah.
scary, scary,
Yeah.
scary the next. My number 4 so far this year is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the 9th film from Quentin Tarantino, as it's been marketed. This movie feels like similar to Ford v Ferrari for me. It feels like a film that should not have come out, at least in 2019, or at least wouldn't have come out in 2019. Where it feels like we get a lot of these films each year that feel similar, I think. This one feels like it's from a different era, a different time. You really feel like you're thrown back to the 1960s, which coincidentally, that's when Ford v Ferrari takes place as well. But it's great. Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, Margot Robbie further solidify themselves as leading actors in Hollywood. There's a reason that they are on the A-list, and this film showcases all of their talents so well. As well as a really good supporting cast in this film, too. Al Pacino shows up. Kurt Russell's in this movie. Timothy Olyphant. Really good supporting cast. But Quentin Tarantino, with this film specifically, it's really interesting because I think of his 9 movies, this is the one where you feel that he really takes the back seat. Like, you could look at this film and think, oh, I wonder who directed this. And you, save for a few scenes, you might not know that it's Quentin Tarantino. And I think that's because he has such a love for Hollywood. He wanted to make sure that he didn't put his footprint on it in the way that he does with a lot of his other movies. And I think that works to its benefit. It's so good. The score and the soundtrack stay with you after you see it. And these performances are off the charts. I mean, Margot Robbie as, I'm blanking.
Sharon Tate.
Sharon Tate, thank you.
Yeah.
That is a heartbreaking story. Everyone knows Sharon Tate's story, but yeah, the way they portray it here, this sense of innocence that you get, and she plays it so well. Leonardo DiCaprio plays kind of a washed-up actor, and the times are changing around him, and he can't really catch up. And that must be so heartbreaking and relatable for a lot of actors who know that they were in their prime at one point and see now that maybe they aren't there anymore, or that movies are being made that don't really suit their talents. And Brad Pitt just he's the cool man, and he plays that character so well. Although I would say of these 3, I think DiCaprio and Robbie are the performances to look at if you're going to be thinking about Oscars at all.
Right.
But yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, really fun, really sincere, and definitely an experience, I would say. Like, probably one of my favorite of the year, which is why it's on this list.
Yeah, for sure. I have to wonder if Leo gets his next best actor statue with this movie. As more and more films come out, I'm starting to feel like he's probably in the lead for it. Maybe Bale and Ford v Ferrari, I don't know. But I think that Leo's got a real great shot at capturing another Best Actor Oscar. And this movie, I haven't seen it yet. I'm really excited to see it. But I'm such a sucker for filmmakers talking about and showing through their movies how much they love movies.
Yeah.
Because I feel in the same vein of what movies add to my life and the value I find in them. So when a Damien Chazelle makes a La La Land, or when a Quentin Tarantino makes a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or when Martin Scorsese talks about how much he adores movies, it's always so touching to me, and I'm just a sucker for stories like that. So I'm very excited to see this movie, to see Leo's performance, Brad's performance, Margot's performance, the sort of direction it takes. I haven't gotten anything spoiled for me, but that's one that I didn't get to see when it first came out. So I'm really excited to get to see it, and we'll see if that sort of changes my list at all when I get to see that one. So number 5 for me is going to be Booksmart. It's a different movie. It's a straight comedy, sort of in the vein of like a Superbad, like a raunchy teen comedy. But it is so good. Olivia Wilde really killed it with this movie. And talk about the lead performances from Beanie Feldstein and Caitlin Devers. They are so excellent in this movie as sort of the high school nerds as they see themselves. And they've worked so hard all throughout high school, and they think, okay, now is when it's going to pay off. We got into the good colleges. We did well on our SATs. Everything is great until they find out everyone around them has been getting the high school experience with partying and going out and stuff, but they got into those same schools. And so Beanie Feldstein's character especially has a sort of crisis of feeling like she wasted these 4 years and feeling that she focused on the wrong things. So they set out to have this night and sort of try and get those 4 years of experience in one night. And it's really great. It's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. It had me laughing the whole time. Again, touching on a lot of these movies like we talked about, it has a lot of heart, and it's really sincere and genuine. And I think that ultimately is what sets fantastic movies apart from just good movies or not necessarily so good movies, is when you have artists telling a story from the heart and being sincere about it. And I think that, a lot of people look at like raunchy comedies like this and think that that's not necessarily the platform for this. And Olivia Wilde takes that and crumples it and throws it out the window, because that's what she did with Booksmart. Dark Horse Best Supporting Actress candidate, Billie Lourd in this movie. She is hysterical. I love Billie Lourd. She's awesome. I'm glad she's getting so much work now, because she deserves it. And she plays this sort of ethereal, like trippy character in Booksmart, and she's so good at it. She's so much fun every time she's on screen. But everybody's so much fun in this movie. I really, really dig Booksmart, and anybody that missed out on it, I think you should really seek it out and watch it, because it is definitely one of the best films of the year.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that Olivia Wilde, for this to be her directorial debut, did such a great job. And I recently listened to a podcast called Off Camera with Sam Jones, where Sam Jones interviewed Olivia. And she talked about some of the direction of these scenes and how some of the more intimate scenes in films are often filmed with an entire crew in the room.
Yeah.
And that can be really intimidating for actors and actresses alike. And she made sure that in scenes like that in her film, there were just the essential people in the room. And I think that for her to have that kind of awareness on her first film set, especially having experienced probably those experiences in her own films, having to act, I think that speaks to her as a person and as a director. And I think anyone would be lucky to work with her on her next project. So yeah, really, so many rising stars in that film too.
Yeah, especially because being a director isn't just about the technical stuff. You're the leader of that film. So for her to have that just out the gate, and she's working with younger actors, because this is a high school movie. Yeah. So to work with younger performers and have that wherewithal to know, like, to draw from your own experiences and know how to make your actors feel comfortable on set. That's how you draw out the best performances, when you have trust between an actor and director. So I'm really excited to see what she does next.
Yeah. So my number 5 of the year so far is Fighting with My Family.
Okay.
Similar to Rocketman, this is a film that really flew under people's radar.
Yeah,
It did not make a ton of money at the box office. But it's really interesting. Stephen Merchant directed this film, and he's traditionally a comedian. And for him to direct a wrestling movie was really interesting to me. And he did write and direct as well. Florence Pugh stars in the film as Soraya Knight. It's based on a true story about Soraya Knight, who makes it in the WWE. Spoiler alert. But Florence Pugh is really a rising star as well, and she's had a great year with Midsommar, which terrified me.
Yeah.
With this film in particular, and she has Little Women coming out as well. So really exciting to see everything that she does. But this film, similar to a lot of the movies on our list, has a lot of heart. It's about family, and it's about some of the difficulties that you can face when you're born into a family and you have a childhood that maybe isn't as traditional or as good as others can be. There's a lot of really good family dynamics in the film. She faces a lot of issues with her brother when she makes it into the WWE and he does not. There's a lot of fighting with the family, you know what I mean, in the film. Dwayne Johnson plays himself in this movie, which was really cool to see. And I think they used him just enough. He doesn't get a lot of screen time, but the screen time that he does get is really good for what he offers to the film. Nick Frost plays her father in the film, and he's hilarious as usual. And there's also I'm blanking again. This is great. But no. It's super good. It really is. Vince Vaughn, that's what I wanted to mention. Vince Vaughn plays the coach in this movie. And he's someone who typically doesn't play dramatic roles.
Yeah.
But I think he's tried to take that on in the past few years with movies like Hacksaw Ridge. And he does it again here. He plays more of a dramatic role, but also comedic. And he does a really great job, too. It's a good film about family and about those dynamics that you can face and trying to find yourself when your family kind of has something picked out for you, maybe a career. I think people can relate to that. And that's kind of what is going on here. And Danny has to find her way in that world and find out what really she loves to do and then work on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really great. Fighting with My Family. Go see it.
So, I mean, so many great movies so far this year. And, just to wrap up, touch on some of the ones that we're still excited to see. I know for me, towards the top of the list, Uncut Gems is probably the one I'm most looking forward to that hasn't been released yet, with Adam Sandler, directed by the Safdie brothers. Super excited for that. Really excited for Little Women. Greta Gerwig directed it. The Greta Gerwig team trio. The dream team is reunited in Greta and Saoirse Ronan and Timothée Chalamet. They're both in this movie, but also Emma Watson and Florence.
Dern.
And Laura Dern and Meryl Streep. I mean, this cast goes on for days. Just an insane collection of talent to tell a really classic story, and I'm really, really excited to see what Greta does with it. What movies are you looking forward to that I'm back?
So movies that I think are probably going to crack my top 10 list right now. I still have yet to see Parasite. I really want to see that. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. But some movies that have really been on my radar since the beginning of the year have been Marriage Story.
Yes.
The Irishman. Really excited for those. And, The Farewell, which is going to be pretty good, I think. Star Wars, obviously, is on our list. That's 1917 and Little Women. For me.
Yeah, Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins teaming up for 1917. Filmed in a really interesting way. Super excited for that. Yeah. And then the one I did want to mention that I hadn't is Knives Out, which comes out this week. Yeah. Date the episode. But Knives Out is out soon, and I'm really excited for that as somebody who's really loved what Rian Johnson has done so far in his career.
Yeah. So that wraps up our top 5 list. Some movies we've seen. Tentative list is something that we want to clarify.
Yeah, we will revisit this at the end of the year once we've seen everything we want to see. Might do a top 10.
Yeah.
We'll see how we feel, but it'll be interesting to see what changes, what stays the same as we see more and more of these movies, because as we sort of touched on, there are a lot we still have to see.
Yeah. So that wraps up episode 7. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. We're Chatting Cinema. Search us there. Search us on Instagram, Twitter now.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter at Chatting Cinema and Facebook.
Thanks so much again for listening. Thank you to SSTV, as always, for allowing us to use the studio space. We'll see you next time.